Matthew's account of this event, page 3 in the New Testament part of your Pew Bible. Then Jesus came from Galilee to John at the Jordan to be baptized by him. John would have prevented him, saying, "I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me?" But Jesus answered him, "Let it be so now, for it is proper for us in this way to fulfill all righteousness." Then he consented. And when Jesus had been baptized, just as he came up from the water, suddenly the heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, the Beloved, with whom I am well pleased." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
The sermon for this morning on this day when we remember and celebrate the baptism of our Lord comes in 3 pictures. Now, they're not pictures painted with oils or watercolor, pastel, but pictures painted, I hope, with words. There are the elements in each one of these pictures is the same. There's John the Baptist. There's Jesus. There are onlookers of various kinds. There's the sky and the water of the River Jordan. Now, the first picture is the picture that portrays the beginning of the story, the first part of the story of Jesus' baptism. Now, we don't know what time of year it is. We don't know whether it's hot or cold. We can imagine that there might be a few clouds in the sky, the sun was shining. I thought as I drove here this morning, well, this would be a good day. After all, people are going to be getting wet, so we'll hope it might not have been too cold. Matthew, of course, locates this story at the River Jordan. The river begins 156 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. It's a very winding river, some 223 miles if you swam it. Flows down what geologists call the part of the Great Rift Valley. And at some places, the river does run quite swiftly, particularly in the areas where it drops from sea level to 1,312 feet below sea level when it ends in that odd sea that's called Dead. Some places the river is quite deep, some 17 feet in some places, but some places it's very shallow. So our picture for today might imagine a shallow part where the water is not running very quickly. Maybe there's a sandy kind of shoal that moves out from the bank into the center of the river. The crowd, we assume men, women, maybe some children. Maybe some have come because they're really serious about their relationship with God. They want to be baptized as a cleansing from sin. They want to rededicate themselves to a renewed spiritual life. Others may have just kind of wandered by. Oh, I wonder what they're doing over there. Or maybe some came because a friend said, come on, we're going down to the river. John is standing in the water. I imagine him very focused on each person that comes to be baptized. John, intense and serious, as he usually seems to be. And into this picture walks Jesus. Surely he walks with great purpose, not hesitating as he makes his way to the edge of the water and he wades in. He knows why he is there, to make public the call of God in his life, to be obedient to the law of God, and to declare himself as one of us. Now, if we're not standing close to John and Jesus, we're not going to hear the conversation that Matthew records between the two of them, but if we were watching, it would be clear from John's facial expression that he did not want to baptize Jesus. But we who are reading the story now from our point of view know that John is clear that Jesus is superior to him. He thinks Jesus should be baptizing him, and that in the end, Jesus insists that the baptism go forward. And it does. Which brings us now to the second picture, which is the second half of the story of this event. Back to the water. The water's now not moving calmly. It's disturbed from all this activity, people walking to and from the shore to John and back. And the sky, as we read, is open, rent asunder, whatever that looks like in your mind's eye. I imagine a ray of intensely bright light focused directly on where Jesus is standing in the water. And all of the onlookers have turned their head, and they're either looking up or directly at Jesus, because this part of the picture has an audio component. We believe it is the voice of God, confirming the call of the divine in Jesus' life. This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Now, we probably don't understand everything about Jesus' baptism, what it meant to him, what it might mean to us, but the visual, this part of the picture, is not too hard. Water in motion, sky with some kind of intense brightness. John the Baptist, he's wet. His arms, hands still dripping wet from others, but from Jesus, immersion in the water. Jesus is wet, standing in the water. The voice of God thundering over the water. The voice of God declaring Jesus called into service, declaring Jesus as the Son of God, declaring Jesus as the beloved. But there's a third picture. Now, this one's made up. It's not in the text. So if you don't like this one, you can imagine your own third picture. But it's an important third picture. I believe it is true. In this third picture, the sky still glows somehow, maybe kind of the way it does toward the end of a particularly spectacular sunset. Clouds, yeah, they're clouds, but now somehow they're on the move as if they have someplace to go, which they do because now Jesus is on the move. There's a lot of movement in this third scene. Jesus is on the move. I imagine that he walks quickly out of the water to the shore and begins to move purposefully down the riverbank. He's got somewhere to go. He's going back to Galilee to teach and to preach, and to Jerusalem then to die. Some commentators will tell us that Jesus died because he took seriously what happened on the day of his baptism. That he took seriously the declaration that he was the beloved child of God. And then he went out to live as a child of God, and some people couldn't stand that, and so they killed him. Now, I know this is not part of today's story, but we already know how the story turns out, so we might as well be honest. Coming up out of the water, Jesus did go forth to die. But he's walking wet, and he drips everywhere, leaving footprints, leaving for us and for all time what it looks like to live as a child of God. In this third picture, Jesus moves purposefully out of the water and heads down the beach because he's got somewhere to go. Now, I'm not quite sure about John. I wonder if John just stands there, startled by the pronouncement from God, although surely he kind of already knew the truth about Jesus. But maybe John, too, begins to move out of the water toward the shore as if he, too, is going to be following Jesus. The water. Since this is a made-up scene, I can make it up. But I imagine the water somehow picking up speed, moving a little more swiftly. Now, sure, the water would have been disturbed as Jesus moves through it, perhaps John as well, but there's some extra movement in the water, as if the water knows that it too has some place to go. As if the water knows too that things will never be the same. And then the onlookers, those who were kind of hanging around on the edges, which might, of course, include us. What are they going to do? Some, perhaps, kind of hung back, startled, stunned, uncertain as to what would really happen. After all, if they go home and tell a family member, guess what, I heard God speak today, the family member's going to go, yeah, right. So maybe they're not sure. Others may have felt compelled to begin to follow Jesus down the beach. But maybe they too are not quite sure. There's some hesitancy in their steps, maybe not quite so much energy, no sense of real commitment. So perhaps too long, many of them will fall away and go back to their own whatever it was they were doing before they went down to the river. But I'm convinced from reading the rest of the Gospels and the Acts and the history of the Christian church that there were some, sometimes only a few, but some who not only heard the voice of God speaking about Jesus, but heard the voice of God in their own hearts and minds and found themselves carried forward, kind of pulled along. No oar, no boat, no rudder, but pulled along. And they began to realize that they too were being swept into service as children of God. Now, those of us that come to a place like this on a Sunday morning, we have some sense of God's voice in our lives, some experience of being swept along on a journey that we did not design. Now, part of our worship on this particular day is to ordain and install elders, officers that you have chosen to be leaders in this particular place for a time. This act of worship has its foundation in the events that we remember and celebrate today. Jesus was baptized, therefore we are baptized. And as part of our baptism, we are called into service of some kind, all different kinds of ways. Some find themselves swept into service as either ruling elders or teaching elders. And nobody knows for sure what's going to happen when they say yes to service. Those we ordain and install this morning, they don't know everything that's going to happen in their term of service as an elder. But at the outset, we do believe that God is calling us. And from time to time, we have the experience of being swept along. The call comes partly in the water as it rushes along. The water pulls us forward, moving us downstream along the riverbank into places we had no idea that we were going to be going until we find ourselves there. I think if we listen, we can from time to time hear the water as it rushes by. For I believe it does rush by here, calling our names, calling this congregation to service. It's partly in the call of the water. Thanks be to God.